Okay, tonight we are working on a 2007 Lexus gs350. Customer's concern is having coolant system issues, whether it's leaking or overheating, something to that extent. He actually brought it to me asking me to do the water pump, but before going forward and doing so, I decided to do a quick simple test that I've been doing here recently on vehicles that have had possible overheat situations or I can't find an external coolant leak. Prior to this, I did set up the basic simple coolant system pressure test, pumped it up to about 20 psi, let it sit, and there was no coolant leaks coming from anywhere. It was holding pressure, and so then I stopped there and decided to go forward with basically checking to see if there is a bad head gasket or two on this V6 engine. And the way that I've been doing it here recently is using the oscilloscope and pressure sensor in the coolant system and tying that, syncing it with a ignition coil for being able to time firing events, top dead center point, which would be the highest pressure point in the cylinders, and if there's any bleed off into the coolant system, you'll see that pressure change or pressure rise in the coolant system all simultaneously and be able to graph it. So that's what we're doing here, and I'm set up for. And basically just use your same adapters that you would use for the coolant system pressure test, except I just got a pressure sensor reading and hooked up to it, and then obviously I am hooked up to a ignition coil control to be able to sync it. Like I said, now I'm using coil number 1 on this engine, and just out of preference. And all you need to do is disable the engine from starting. Obviously keep ignition because you're going to use the ignition trace. So basically disable fuel and get it to just crank over and take a good reading. Then you want to, or the way that I've seen it be best results is when you do it during cranking. You can't, I've done it a few times while running, but it gets a little too messy, and all you need to do is be able to capture top dead center compression pressures, and hopefully be able to capture that in the coolant system if there is a failed gasket. So it's simple enough, 2 hookups, and then get your scope just set up to run, and then just crank her over. So on this one, the blue channel, channel A, is going to be ignition. The red trace is going to be my pressure in the coolant, which I'm turned on now. You can see that in the red trace there is actual change. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and stop it, go back, and the way this pressure sensor works is when the voltage drops, travels down, it's an actual raise in pressure. if it were to climb up, that would be vacuum. And obviously during cranking, there is a pressure buildup during the whole cranking time, and once it lets go, pressure then I guess kind of relaxes or goes back to its steady state, and then again cranking, boom, big pressure rise, increase the whole time. Now let's get in there closer, and the firing order on this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each one of these blue ones is ignition number 1. At cranking, basically it is piston top dead center, highest compression, and then here's 2 revolutions. So in between there, all other cylinders are coming up on compression stroke. And here on this one is where you'll have a big jump in pressure, big increase in a pressure spike, and it's repetitive, as you can see. So what you do here is let's see if we can get, you grab your ruler to be able to see all your other cylinders on compression. So you put up 6 rulers, and let me so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, back to 1. This one here, top dead center, is when that pressure spikes. That is cylinder number 5. And there is, again on this one, looks like another increase in pressure, but not 100% sure if it's due to gasket or because of just thinking as I'm explaining. Well, I guess the way it's looking and the way in other ones, not that it's fully straight and dead and steady, but there's not like a huge rise in pressure. There are, well, not so much, but here I would say is a bigger rise. So possible damage on 6 also area, but 5, and then again I'm not 100% sure if it's the way it looks is because it's right after a big increase, because I have seen this in another vehicle's coolant system that the cylinder afterwards did seem to look like it had increase in pressure right after the bad cylinder. So that's why I paused to think, because this is the second time I'm seeing that, so I don't know if it's just a result of it coming from a big increase in pressure, or due to actual true gasket issue on the fallen cylinder. So we'd have to sit and try to figure that out, but right now at least I know 100% cylinder 5 is leaking into the coolant system with a huge increase in pressure, to the point where it cuts off the limit of this sensor, and it's repetitive. So just before 2 cylinders before number 1, 2 cylinders before. So it's the same all throughout on the capture, as you can see. And on this next cranking event, same ordeal, whichever way you want to look at it, 2 before number 1 or off to the right, 5th one. But it's there, it's repetitive. You should not be seeing that in the coolant system during cranking, unless obviously you've got a failed gasket and you're building up pressure and seeing it timed when a cylinder is at top dead center. So this guy is going to get a phone call from me, and basically we'll let him know what I found, and I'm not going to go forward with the water pump replacement because he has no need to do so, and most likely we'll have to either replace an engine or do head gaskets. But honestly, I've had these 3.5s in before for similar situations, and on these it is cheaper to do an engine. But that's for the customer to decide, see what he wants to do. But again, hope that it is informative or interesting, and you take it and maybe start trying to practice and cutting the headache out of replacing parts you never even needed to because of a failed engine. So one quick way of avoiding unnecessary work: capture the pressure in the coolant system and sink it. Wanted to get an after shot of the coolant system pressure readings while cranking, being that the customer did opt to replace the engine. We've gone ahead and done that. It runs good, it's fine, no issues, heats up well, doesn't pressurize the coolant system, hoses aren't ready to blow off, and so I decided to, why not get a quick capture of it cranking and while monitoring the pressure. Part of also why, to show a perfect example, is because of a couple people were asking me or maybe questioning that possibly you're seeing like a impeller or something to that nature while on that big spike while cranking it over, and just clearly just wanted to show that and explain that if you're seeing a big spike and it can be synced with an ignition coil at cranking, during cranking, which would put that cylinder pretty much at top dead center, which would create its highest compression pressure. And if you're seeing that timed and synced at the same time in the coolant system where pressure rises at that time that the ignition is firing, it's clearly going to be pressure being introduced by the piston being at top dead center and not an impeller or any of that sort. You got to think about, first of all, however many impellers the water pump has, or fins, whatever you want to call it. And if you do, I mean, all fins and impellers are shaped the same, and while rotating, I would imagine would create a pretty much uniform type of pulsation, if you want to call it, while pushing the coolant in there. And if it's creating some type of waves or, like I said, pulsation, you're going to see some sort of pretty much similar impeller pushes. So if you were to have one be oddball from an impeller, you'd almost have to have an impeller broken or missing, and that would create an oddball pulsation. But in my mind, if there is an impeller missing, which then you could pick out, if you can pick out in the coolant system, I would imagine that the pulsation would be less, or a lower pulsation compared to other ones, because basically the fin is not there while it's spinning and won't create a push while rotating. So you would almost have almost like a relative compression with a dead hole, where you won't create amperage push on the capture. That would be what I would believe you would see on the coolant system, pulsations being created by an impeller. Plus, if it was a water pump impeller issue, you could never get it to be timed or synced exactly at the same time every time with the same cylinder magically happening when that's at top dead center. There's no way that would happen. The impeller would just have to create that oddball pulsation at all different times because of the basically ratio, and when it rotation rate, and when that oddball fin is going to hit in relation to 720s all the time. It's going to be at different points. And I think about that almost like a timing chain that has colored links. You turn it over its first time, the links already moved from the timing mark, the reference point, and you won't ever get it back till however many rotations way after that. That missing impeller won't ever time itself exactly all the time when one of the cylinders is on top dead center during cranking and creating high pressures in the coolant system. So just a few things to point out. I'd imagine you'd see maybe some sort of impeller pulsation or pushes, but if you're looking for bad head gasket or high pressure buildup in the coolant system, just sync it and time it like I did with the previous engine, and it'll happen all the time. And you're looking just for a way big increase, something that just stands out big enough and helps confirm why the hoses are just over pressurized and you're having coolant issues, stuff like that. Enough rambling on. Let's go ahead and crank it over, see what it's gonna look like. It's the same setup, same vehicle, which was another reason why I wanted to do it, because you'll get to see the same engine structure, what it looks like when it's good, and we'll go ahead and crank it. Alright, that is the capture that this Lexus created. It's just crank, no start. Red channel is going to be synced to number 1 coil. Blue is going to be the coolant system pressure, and what that looks like. Obviously you can tell when we started cranking, and you do see some activity in the coolant system. Now, the closer we get, there's no clear oddball, high spike, actually downwards on this, or either way, nothing that jumps out that's way out above that spectrum or below. Nothing jumps out, and there are some, I guess, pulsations. which would make sense, you know, if you're able to pick that up enough with your setup. You are seeing the pulsations that are created while the water pump is spinning. All are, you know, kind of similar to each other, which, like I said, you would kind of try to expect. It's just the water pump spinning with, you know, hopefully all impellers there, and you're just seeing movement or pulsation of that while it's rotating. Now that's when it turns off. Yeah. But yeah, from far away, there's nothing stands out. No high pressure buildup. You do get to see some pulsations, which, like I said, is probably expected. And that's it. That's pretty much, that's a known good on the same vehicle. And even if you wanted to, let me, and there's the 6 rulers for the 6 cylinders on top that center. So TDC, TDC, so on and so forth. At that point, for each cylinder, there's no, remember, pressure builds up or displays on this one towards the bottom. There's no increase in pressure while at TDC, and not one that stands out crazy enough to look like an anomaly compared to the others. So not much more that can say from that, other that you know, pretty cool to show and see that a comparison from one you knew was bad, faulty, and you actually were able to capture that compared to it with a known good setup. So that's all. Hope that clears up something or helps you see a bad and a good, and gets you a little bit more comfortable with how to go about testing them.